agenda, anything I omitted or that you want to add at this point? Then I move that we go forward with the agenda as I've outlined. A second? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Well, let's get right into it. Old business. The Tennessee blasting standard changed effective July 1st. We had talked about the changes in 2 prior meetings. In front of you, you have a working copy of the law printed out so that we can use it as reference here in this meeting. There's no warranties on the printouts. I hope it's complete, but I think we may need it as we go into the rule change. I guess one question to the council: has there been anything that we should bring forward as far as the rule or the law changes or the implementation of it that has caused any of our blasters or any of our firms or any of our handlers or the administration any headaches? I think it's been pretty straightforward. It was just a simple vibration standard update and a few minor changes. One thing that was mentioned during the last meeting was the change in the law of the notification to pipelines that carry fossil fuel, basically, or liquid pipelines. Has there been any issues dealing with pipelines that has come up with as a result of the new notification?
Or as in our world, we've got one job we're currently working right now beside a Colonial. Valuation table out from 200 to 300 foot on, but that's their approach.
Talked about looking at best practices for pipelines. I have to say, with all the other things that were going on since the last meeting, we have not made any progress on there. On that, it's still on the list, so we'll carry it over into the next. As a council, should come up with best practices so that it's clear from an administrative, from a blaster, and from a pipeline company's perspective as to what the expectations are. Thank you. So that brings me to the next item that has to do with testing and the testing questions for our blasters. That has been an issue that we addressed a couple of meetings ago as well. I'd like to report on progress and then ask Mr. Hightower to tell us where we are currently. Back in early April, a subcommittee met with the State Fire Marshal and a company called Morris & McDaniel about the test and the administration of the blaster test question. And back then, we discovered that some of the questions were outdated. They were categorized in more than 20 different areas, and it was very difficult to see whether they were safety questions or regulatory questions or technical questions. And since then, we've worked on an outline for key result areas for the test and came up with 5, which was shared during the last meeting. And since April, we've met with Morris & McDaniels at least 3 times that I remember, and worked with Mrs. Kim Anderson on looking through the questions, updating the questions to current standards, and taking the questions out that we thought were either too difficult or too obsolete. And then we'd start categorizing them into 5 areas. They included safety, regulations, product initiation systems, blast design, and environmental effects. What's still missing is that we categorize the questions in each area by difficulty. In other words, questions that we want on every test and questions that are nice-to-know questions that are kind of coming up at random. It's the objective of Morris & McDaniel to have a 50-question test in 5 areas, so that's roughly 10 questions in each area. And of those questions, there will be 5 important or must-know questions and 5 need-to-know questions. And then they will have 2 versions of the test so that you don't get the same question from test to test. We're not quite there yet. I think we're lacking 1 more meeting. And then we have the questions prioritized, and that from that point on, we can administer the questions. Once the test is in place, we can continue working on the blaster study guide. We have a rough outline of it, so we got the outline, and we've got the appendices, which include the regulations and some blaster guides in there. And I want to thank everyone who worked on the subcommittee with the test questions and got material to us for their efforts. That includes Mr. Thomas, who came from East Tennessee a couple times to join us for meetings, our newest member, Mr. Mike Larkin, who's also made a few meetings, and then everyone who made the initial meeting. And Alan, thank you for sending all the blaster material from Kentucky and other states. It's been a helpful assistance. Mr. Williamson, Mr. Hutchinson, and Mr. Gwynn, thank you so much for your support there. Hightower, from your perspective, what do we need to do to get over the hump? How can we help?
Right now, where we're at, I am trying to facilitate with enforcement gang this final.
Been talking to the industry members and having had some individual conversations with our blasters out there. We're desperate. It's been a long time coming, and some of the blasters now that take the old test look at it and say, well, there's so many lawyer questions on there that even with a law degree, it's difficult to remember all these administrative nuances. So the faster we can get it done, the better. And you have a council here of volunteers, and all you need to do is invite us and facilitate, and we'll be there to help you in any way we can.
We appreciate that. My goal is to
All the power to you. Yes, and we need to get that rolling.
I've got one question. But
Any more comments on the test questions and where we are? Okay. Well, hopefully next meeting we can report on success on the meeting and then review the study guide finally. Yeah, that's my list of old business. I think at this point I'd like to move on to review the current rules. When the Tennessee blasting standard or the blasting law changed, one of the sections of the bill was basically that would trigger a rule review. Now, the Tennessee law obviously is passed through Congress, and I guess we had a discussion prior to the meeting as well. And I would like to point out again that this law change was made unanimously on both sides, the House and the Senate. So basically we have the full support of the legislator in the current law changes. Pretty spectacular in the current climate, I think. So now it's up to the fire marshal to review the rules and then basically complement the law changes. And it's also a good opportunity to update the rules. And the last review was in 2009. So I think with this review, we're looking forward to what we need to change in the next few years. it is the duty of the Advisory Council to assist the department in developing reasonable policies and regulations that will protect public safety while promoting efficiency and effectiveness. I think that's the role that we see ourselves in, that we can help you with. So as we review the rules, I think at this point what we can offer is basically a discussion on items that the industry or the members of the council would like to see in the new set of rules. In front of you, you have a copy of the rules. That's the one that's posted on the Fire Marshal's website. And when you look at the rules, they start out with the definitions. And I guess what we could do is go through each paragraph, and then, Mr. Conradi, if you want to take notes, I guess on each paragraph we can at least collect the ideas today as to what we think we need to change in each one. The definitions of blasting terms are in the Tennessee blasting standard and in the rules. There's no rhyme or reason which one's in which. I guess they just ended up there whenever they were used first. So some definitions we need to go to the law to find, and some we need to go to the rules to find. But as an industry, we have relied on the IME, Institute of Makers of Explosives. They have SLPs, Safety Library Publications, and one of them is called the glossary or the industry terms. And that's where we've been going as a resource. And as we made changes to the law, what we try to do with definitions is update them so that there's no colloquialisms in there. Like you probably remember shot being in there and, you know, those kind of things. And you know, we do blasting, we don't. So those were made. Now, I've looked through definitions. I didn't see anything that stood out. But I think at this point, is there anyone that saw anything under definitions that needs to be changed? Not the case. So the second paragraph then has to do with minimum blasting standards, and that's the adoption by reference. To my knowledge, that was added with the 2000 review. The 2000 was the law review. The 2003 was the rules review. So with the 2003 review, basically we took the federal regulations that pertain to blasting and put them in here by reference, so that you know which ones apply. Is there any change to the federal regulations that anyone in the council is aware of? I know ATF has not. OT hasn't. MSHA, no updates there. Okay. We're good on the adoption by reference. I don't think we need to add anything. Been pretty strict. Third paragraph, registration and fees. From an industry perspective, they were changed in 2009 pretty healthily. So I think we're okay where they are. In fact, there's a 2019 report on the State Fire Marshal's website where the Fire Marshal comes to the same conclusion, that they're at the point where they need to be. Then we have classification of registration, paragraph 4. The current classification is a blaster, limited blaster, and handler. And then with the classification in this paragraph, we have the responsibilities included. The law tells us what classifications we need. The rules tells us what they are and what the responsibilities are. With the law change, we have a limited blaster for underground operations. So what we need to do here, I guess between subsection 2 and subsection 3, we need to add limited blaster for underground mining operations. The limited blaster responsibilities are the same for underground as they are for the surface. So basically we could include that. What is different is that we're no longer restricted to 5 pounds per blast. So a limited blaster on the surface is restricted to 5 pounds or less for, let's say, utility post-hole blasting or beaver dam blasting, agriculture blasting, demolition, those kinds of blasting. Underground, they would use more. So the 5 pound requirement would be taken out. But what should come in is the underground mining operation. And I guess what we would understand as an underground mining operation is an underground mining operation with an MSHA ID number. MSHA is Mine Safety and Health Administration, and obviously they would have an ID number. There are definitions, I guess, if you look between OSHA and MSHA tunneling, that we necessarily want to address the tunneling community. Tunneling part of a mining operation. In other words, if the mineral recovered from the tunnel is sold as a mineral, it becomes a mining operation. There's a MSHA ID database on MSHA.gov, and I went there last night and looked up MSHA IDs for state of Tennessee, and at first I was a little bit surprised. We have 2,200 MSHA IDs in the state of Tennessee. Now that includes abandoned mines and old mines and temporary closed mines. So when you look at active ones, there's about 200 active mines, and there's about 15 or thereabouts underground mines. Six zinc mines, and the rest is cement and crushed stone. So it's a growing segment of our market, and I think we'll do a service to the blasters in our underground mines in giving them an opportunity for registration there. I think we should also say that limited blaster for underground does not mean limited in ability. It just means limited to the application of underground. So like a blaster registration, the registration stays with the person. It's not connected to the organization, but it's limited to underground mining operations. Does that hurt? Is that? Of course. Anything else on registration, classification of registration? I guess if we make that change, that would move handler from 3 to 4, and then firm from 4 to 5. The subsections.
Can I ask?
Underground miners.
Discussion.
Different ball game.
Well, I mean, I understand that. I just didn't know what.
There were several concerns about that. When I guess the demographics were shared, we have very few limited blasters, actually. I think the initial push when the classification change was made was that the utility company said, we have so many blasters that shoot post holes or have occasional use for explosives, but it's very limited, that it's very difficult for us to put them through 16 hours of refresher training every 3 years. All the testing of blasters, so they wanted to limit it. The underground community came back and said, we basically would like to see the same. So instead of 16 hours continuing education, you would only need 8 every 3-year cycle. Instead of passing a test that includes environmental effects question on scale distance and vibration and seismographs, which are not necessarily applicable to an underground blaster, we would like for them to just pass a limited blaster test, and then they're limited to the application. Now, there's nothing preventing an underground blaster to become a general blaster and just go ahead and pass the test and be a blaster in the state of Tennessee, but then they would need 16 hours refresher training and pass the more difficult. Next concern was that if you have an underground blaster and they've been underground for 20 years, and then the mine shut down because they're registered blasters, there's nothing preventing them from hiring on with a company that has a downtown project. and that would provide an extra hurdle, so to speak, or incentive for them.
Blaster,
I think it was easier to put it in limited because then the same
then didn't have to
rules on
create-
continuing education apply.
didn't have to create a better system.
But yeah, good question, sure. On subsection 4 as is, there are responsibilities for the firm. These question one of the prior meetings, one issue was shared that if a firm hires a blaster and the blaster has an incident, that may trigger a review of the blasting practices and require a plan of corrective action. That is up to the blaster, because typically that's who you go to when you make changes. If the firm then releases the blaster, hires another one, is there still responsibility on the firm regarding to the project that they sent notification for? So if there's any additional firm has inserted into
That throws two different firms. Just say they throw the entire firm off and bring a new firm in to finish.
First firm comes in,
I'm just saying, no accidents.
So let's move on to paragraph 5, continuing education. Continuing education was added with the 2000 law change, 2003 rule change. In my opinion, it's been successful in that our blasters, who were many more in numbers back then, have received training that is relevant to their practice. They've been updated on rule changes. They've been updated on safety practices, and I think as a whole it's worked pretty well. But as everything that's worked well for 20 years, there's always room for improvement and changes. So one observation I'd like to share with the fire marshal, I guess, is when you go to the website as it is today, there's a list of approved courses, and there's a list of instructors. If you look at the instructors, some of them have retired for a few years. If you look at the courses, some courses have a date stamp of 2006. And I'm sure, well, since 6, the law has changed twice. So if we take them literally, and if they have not been updated, which they may have, we have missed the opportunity to stay current with training. So if we change the continuing education paragraph, I think we should step back a minute and say, are we still on track with what the spirit was? The spirit was that our blasters get 16 hours of continuing education every 3 years. That's basically 8 hours a year, and you can skip a year. Limited blaster get 8 hours, so basically they get 1 day of training every 3 years, and the handlers get 6 hours, which is the same 8 hours as a limited blaster would get, except they don't get the technical part. They don't need to calculate powder factor. As far as the continuing education hours, if you compare them to neighboring states, I think we're still very much in line. Some are more, some are a little less, but I think in terms of the spirit, we're still okay. Now, as far as the managing of those 16 hours, the state of Tennessee has taken the approach to say we approve the course, not the instructor. So if a course is submitted and it has certain topics, certain materials, certain criteria, then we approve the course, and we don't necessarily, well, we look at the bio of the instructor, but the instructor doesn't need to meet certain qualifications. So if the instructor is known in the industry, has been a blaster for a number of years, that's fine as an instructor. Is that still the approach we want to take? Approve the course and then let everything fall into place. Now, some neighboring states, I think, do it a little differently, but most of them that are comparable to our industry approve the courses. I know Kentucky does. I know Georgia does. And it's not, I guess some coal mining states approve the instructor and then they let them work on the content.
Are you aware of a situation?
Preference. I'm just describing the approach. If you looked at MSHA training, for example, when you do MSHA safety training, there's a regulation that says here's the safety training curriculum, and a company needs to submit a safety training plan with all the materials that they're using and all that stuff. But in order to give the training, you have to be an MSHA approved instructor. So you get a little, they call it a blue card. So MSHA makes you go through either training or you have to have a certain list of qualifications. If you don't have the qualifications, there's a course that MSHA offers on how to become an MSHA instructor. So let's say you have one with a college degree who's been teaching all his life. You can assume that they can facilitate a course. But if someone comes from the practice, they may need a little help. So they go to that course, they pass the course, and then they become an instructor. And then the instructor has the responsibility to follow the content. What we do is we say, give us the content and with a bio of the instructor, but we trust the quality of the training. But what could happen in some cases is that you have a fellow blaster who can type, submit a course, and then you can't really look at the quality of the training. And I don't know how many courses there are, but if you looked at the resources you have to sit in those trainings and supervise, they're pretty limited. So I don't know how many courses you can actually look at the quality of training. Now that's a leap of faith that we make, and I think our community kind of looks at itself and says, well, we make sure the guys get right training because it's a lot of effort to put people in a room for 8 hours or 16 hours. You want to make sure that it's relevant and high quality and not just 8 hours of entertainment. So I think we've taken a pretty open but also sound approach. Now the challenge I think I have is that some of the courses, if they're not updated, they're not as relevant anymore. So if you get the same instructor with the same course year after year after year, and we've got 20 years of history of that, then you're not really progressing. And also, new changes like the new law, the new rules, they need to find their way into the training pretty quickly. And I think that's the concern, not who teaches. Also, I think when you look at instructors, we have been generous with outside instructors. And I think that, from my perspective, that's a good idea. So if you look at Kentucky Blasting Conference, Alabama Blasting Conference, Georgia Blasting Conference, whatever, Missouri or Ohio, they're always good for blasters to go to because they get a different perspective. But what they don't give you is the Tennessee rules and the Tennessee standards. So somehow that needs to find it. Now, if we read through this, one of the had in discussions before is when you look at the following list, in subsection 9 of paragraph 05. The following is a list not complete. The following list is not a complete list of continuing education topics. That's an opportunity to steer the quality of training. And I think what we should do there is take our lessons from the test and the study guide and go back to our 5 key areas of safety, safety, regulations, products and initiation systems, blast design, and environmental effects. And probably be a little heavy on the safety and regulatory side so that our blasters really know what current safety practices include, and also know which rules and regulations apply to that job, whether it's OSHA or MSHA or ATF, DOT, and applied in the context of the state of Tennessee. When you look at some of the subjects, placarding. Placarding, if that's a DOT. Important to know, especially if you're supervising transport to and from your site, but it's not, I would say, a primary function of a registered blaster in the state of Tennessee. So, long story short, we have a list of 5 key areas. Each key area has a subsection. There's 3 subsections that we shared in a letter to the state. Actually, that was the last summary of our testing questions. So you have the 5 key result areas with 3 subsections. And I think that would make a very good structure for training content in the rules. Started out saying we want to make recommendations to the state. I think at this point we're just collecting. Paragraph. The way I consultants to you work for you. Okay, paragraph 6, blasting restrictions. Five days for variances, is that good enough? Of the items on the list, part of variations that we haven't thought of. For example, we talked about underground applications. When underground applications do blast reports, do they need to report the weather? The answer today is yes, because the law says you need to. So unless they request a variance, they have to record the weather. And I think some do that by just, recording the weather on the surface at the time, which is irrelevant, but it's meeting the letter of the law, not the technical spirit. Are there any life easier for else on blasting restrictions? F7, blasting, storage, and destruction of materials. That's become less and less important as we don't store on blasting sites necessarily anymore. And the storing regulations, I mean, ATF hasn't changed, so I think whatever is in here is still fully valid. Boric materials. Binary explosives, two-component explosives. I don't think it's. It may apply. It's basically a small scale for limited blaster. That's something you would use in demolition or agricultural blasting, and the paragraph is in here to address that. But I don't think it's a big concern of the blasting community.
Haven't seen it. That's kind of the new.
Also,
Basically, electronics in my ball game, we don't use them much unless we're doing something very.
8-millisecond rule is just a legal definition of what a delay is. And the only time we would apply it is in the law, and it's about whether you need a seismograph or not. So it doesn't establish high vibration or low vibration. It just establishes if you're delaying more than 8 milliseconds and you follow the scale distance, you don't need a seismograph. Once you go to electronics, I think most of the time you would use a seismograph. And then the 8-millisecond rule doesn't apply anyway. So it could be 1 or 2 or 5 or 16 milliseconds. And the other, I think, answer I would say there.
It kind of leaves a lot of gray in my mind. But I mean, across the last inspection, gradually come. Gradually. When
OSHA and MSHA both have not really updated their regulations to electronics. So if you looked at, part 56, 57 for MSHA or 1910, 1926 for OSHA, nothing in there about electronics. On the state level, I think what we would refer to is best practices. And what we have is the IME SOP 4, Safety Library Publication number 4, do's and don'ts,
now, is there
So
different protocols?
and again, if you choose a delay pattern of any system that you have,
Well, what I was referring to far as, their standard protocol. I'm talking systems. I've used or that's just curiosity on my
And SOP 4 would say follow manufacturer's recommendation. So I think at this point, that write it into the rules. But obviously, I'll keep it on my list here. We'll keep rolling with it. That's a good one to include with the study guide.
Yeah,
And
because,
basically,
I mean, like I said, these things have got remotes now. You hook it up to the remote and you bring the high speed stuff. Ain't running the buzz line out there and hooking it to the battery on the truck and not telling nobody. So
it's just at the beginning. So a few years from now, we'll, yeah.
I think I'd refer back to the,
like I said, it'll have to be a drill.
Anything else on rule review? Did we overlook something? Or hope you have a list of items to work with. The council is open at any point to assist in any way. You will have to facilitate it. We can't get together for obvious reasons and decide on our own. You need to facilitate it for us. But you have a lot of volunteers, and you'll always run into an open door when you ask.
I'm back up to a second. When you're talking about the training, well, I just
Training?
this thought in my mind: the training, the trainers, and we're talking about not. Was there some forever? Is that where I'm taking this? Is anybody looking at these, or is it a possibility that we could somehow in the future have somebody review these just to get updated material in there, as you were saying? It's just my thought on that. Is there?
Well, that was a suggestion to the fire marshal. I would say we have a 3-year cycle with renewal with the council. So 3 years makes a lot of sense. So basically, you have a rolling list of courses, and after 3 years, it falls off. And yes, and reviewing also means, I think at this point, the process would be that an inspector would look at the content and basically say, yeah, this makes sense, or this doesn't make sense. And
We just want these young blasters all the proper information. Is where I'm updated.
I wonder if I mean, just thought with that, if accomplish the updating, if it would need to be quite as frequent as 3, given the, the level at which things are changed. The fact that it's not, some kind of re-up is not in place now has allowed things that clearly, if they are as they were submitted and not been updated in any way, there would be things that aren't as relevant, or certainly there would be things they weren't inclusive of. But 5 or 6 years might be a little more reasonable cycle. I mean, in terms of keeping things updated well past the point that we're likely looking at now, given the dates that you referenced of things that were submitted. I mean, 3 is essentially the cycle you're looking at with a licensure, and so it might be worth considering something that, instead of putting, there may not be a lot of change that's really required every 3 years, and so then you're just essentially putting something in place where somebody's going to need to resubmit, and things will need to be reevaluated. But is that a little? Is there a better balance spot is all I wonder time-wise.
have to look at it from, one is there's a concern, some courses don't change. And you know the instructor, and you know that they update the material, and if there's a change, it's automatically included in the new course. But I think the challenge we have, if you looked at the website today, there are names on there that are no longer in the industry. There are names no longer working for that those courses are not up to date.
Right.
So what mechanism does the fire marshal have to make courses fall off the list?
No, I agree with the notion of that mechanism totally, and I'm not wholly opposed to 3 years. It's just an observation that I wonder if that.
Could say when not doing it anymore.
I don't think that they need to notify. I think what we also say is if you have the same course, send it in 3 years later. It hasn't changed.
Okay.
I mean, you don't
Yeah.
have the same course outline. I mean, I've seen
Sure.
that.
Right, and like I say, I'm not wholly opposed to the notion of 3 years. I just wondered if, because the other side of that is the review process, that the state's going to need to do, and I think we're out of balance right now. Just thinking about it and looking at some of the facts you brought to the table, date-wise and course-wise, it makes sense that we would have some, and really having some rule change and would be something that gives them a reason to do what it takes, the effort it takes to have the organizational structure for that review makes all the sense in the world. And like I said, not wholly opposed. 3 years, certainly I wouldn't think any more frequently than that, but just a thought, whether 5 or 6, something like that might be.
Decision based on.
That's just, those are just some ideas that they might look at from the standpoint of staffing, what that review looks like and things like that. And it doesn't seem like it's probably a tremendous amount through the years. If we put it on a cycle, it might be a little different. So they might want to consider that.
Fine with anything. Also on rule. Let's move on to new business then, and I'll start off with just a suggestion, and that was collected again from input we get throughout the time between meetings. The law changed in July. The rules are going to change. We'll have a new study guide and a new test at some point. Those are wonderful opportunities to share the changes and to communicate with the blasting community. I think at this point, when we look at how we communicate, in the old days you would get a memo every now and then. Today we have the website, and on the website there's opportunities, to post updates. And when you looked at the State Fire Marshal's website with respect to blasting, today there's not much there, if I may say so. So I was dabbing around, several times, obviously, to find resources for the meeting, and you really have to want to look for stuff, able to find. Conceptually, I think that's an opportunity for us in the council to discuss and work on. But obviously, again, we would be a consultant to you. There's no piece that informs the public. Maybe that's intentional, but maybe blasting in general, about the role that the fire marshal takes in enforcing blasting regulations. And there's a tremendous activity in the state of Tennessee. We just talked about 200 mining operations. Look at all the construction operations. I think when you looked at notifications in one of the reports, there's between 30 and 50 blasting notifications each month that the state receives. So there's a lot of activity going on. And it's not that we need to highlight the activity for security reasons, but we need to highlight that this is not a one-off. This is not something that happens only once in a blue moon. Blasting is a daily activity, and it's a daily us to use explosives in the state of Tennessee. Second piece is to have a resource for our blasters. And that resource would include all the forms that they need, all the procedures that they need, maybe some explanations as to, what do I need to do to get continuing education? What do I need to do to renew? What background checks? What do I need to get my licenses if I want to do blasting in Tennessee? Who do I need to submit things to? What are reasonable expectations once I submit? So if I, submit an application to take the test, how long would it take before I get a response? Those kind of things. Now, I know from your end that there are some initiatives that the State Fire Marshal is taking to resource the communication piece, but if you elaborate a bit more. Thank you.
One thing I know, well, as you mentioned when you handed me a copy of this, you tried to pull this together best that you could. I've always thought, I realize it's posted electronically in sections and broken up, but I've always thought that it would be a good service to the industry, the folks that are there, is to have it published in a PDF format where you can literally take that thing, look at it as one document, not hyperlink through cyberspace everywhere, and be able to take that, print it off, share it with, because if we're trying to educate and we're trying to communicate, we when we have it only available the way that we do, it kind of detracts from accomplishing our goal, I think, at times. I think it'd be better to have what the current law and regulations are in PDF form that can be accessed that way, and not through, okay, let me get this page. If you're trying to print that off to share that with the group or whatever, it's an arduous task.
Start doing links.
Right, and it's easy,
I get my information.
It's easy to omit something because you haven't hit every link, or not. And so it seems like a simple thing. I don't know. It seems like in the past when that's been brought up that maybe.
Well, I tell you a good example, Wade, is the 2-inch per second. Now that's at the subsection.
Right.
It's 1.25 and it's 2.00, but you've got a really good point. Big in the full. I've gotten jobs about.
Sure.
Steps have all.
Right. It just, I think it would be helpful. Yeah, well,
I agree. And, Alan's been all of us, and the draft for the study guide actually has these as the appendix, so that you give the rules to people who need them, and not just links and
yeah.
Out
1,000-page
there
document.
actually fight on it just right.
Right. Well, with the regulations, I mean, with the law and the regs too. You want both.
So when I look at old business and major take up, hopefully before testing, categorize the tests so that they can administer a new one. And then we would look at limited blaster and underground blaster tests after that meeting. The second one is the rule review, and Mr. Conradi, and I guess he will take the leadership in setting up meetings if we need to, and will assist in any way through subcommittees. Obviously, you're in charge of the timeline on that, holding us back. Power forward. And the last one is that we, until the next meeting, collect suggestions for communication opportunities, including the website. They also include publishing documents that our blasters, public source blasters research. What's under new? Days ago, I got an email from a dear friend.
Oh, well, thank you. Appreciate that, Frank, very much. So the email that I sent Frank was telling him that I feel like it's time for me to resign from the committee. I was thinking back to a time when my father passed away. He was 83 at the time. Todd, and my brother, and I, it had been an interesting day. He got to live a full, amazing life. He's the one that started our company back in the same year that actually the blasting law was enacted in 1975. Our company, our families had a connect with this industry. As I was a teenager when that was going on, and got in the business in my late teens in '76, and so I've kind of really felt like I've grown up in this industry. One of the things that happened at the time of his passing, it was rather abrupt. He had good full last day. Great way to live, knowing him. And as my brother and I had met at the hospital, just real quickly, what had happened is he'd been out, had a full day of things, been out for the evening shopping for his 13 great grandkids' Christmas presents. Wasn't feeling well, went home. I got a call that he not feeling well from a friend that was shopping with him. So we go over to check on him. About that time, in the meantime, he had a little chest tightness, called for EMT, so his friend did. And so we're there. He said, well, you're not having a heart attack, but we're going to take you over to the hospital to see why you're not quite feeling best. And we'll just go with our lights off, with our lights on but not sirens blaring. We're not in a land speed race, We're just going to follow protocol. Follow us over there. So we get there, and they said, wow, we're really sorry. The minute we shut the back of the ambulance door, he had a heart attack. And, we've been trying to keep him alive the whole way over here. 5 guys are back there trying to resuscitate him, and he's passed. And, it was a shocker. But, I was old enough at that time to have contemplated death. And knowing him, seeing the way that my grandfather, his father before him passed, and thinking about relatives, I'm thinking, well, this is kind of on the short list of the best way to go. I mean, I know what he did today. He went to church this morning, had a properties committee meeting, was a part of a Bible study, called me when I was in East Tennessee, didn't know I was, asked me to play golf. He played golf that afternoon. He went out and was shopping for his 13 great grandkids with a close friend of mine and my wife's, and they had gone back, and she was trying to help him because he, had just started not feeling well. And so my brother and I look at him. The people thankfully said, "Hey, would you like to come into the room?" I mean, it was a peaceable passing. Some people grabbed their chest; they're in all this pain. He closed his eyes. It was like somebody turned the switch off, and it's gone. And so anyway, we're in there sitting, looking, thinking about what an amazing dad we had. What a great example. You're thinking about times as young kids that we got in trouble, and no question about who's gonna take care of you. And so, I've looked at his example a lot. My brother said to me at that time, he goes, with people today growing up without fathers, with situations and things like that, and you can understand why they might find a straight path. He said, we don't have any excuse. I mean, we've had this amazing example before us, and our mother had passed away previously after having Alzheimer's for a decade, and he took care of her at home. Her big fear was being institutionalized somewhere, and he said, that won't happen if I'm alive. And to his credit, to his word, he took care of her for a decade. And so I say that to say this. I had a great example. So I'm not ready to retire. I'm 66. I learned how to work watching my dad work. I learned love for work, accomplishing things that were productive, watching him do that. But I learned something from him, too. While he worked well into his 70s, before he stepped away from our business that he started, by the time he was 65, he had some things in place for the business to survive him, and important roles that he had associated with our organization or with our organization's interaction with the community. He had things pretty well in place so they would survive him well before he stepped away or health forced him away, which health never did. He just chose to kind of back out as he got well up in his 70s. And so toward that end, I guess I'm 66 this month. I plan to keep working into my 70s, or as long as health permits. I like working, but it seems like a good time for transition and an appropriate time. I'd like to recommend that the council consider, and the powers to be consider, Eric Gregorian, who works with our firm, has ownership in our firm, is well over 2 decades, going toward completion of his 3rd decade with VCE. Certainly has served as a volunteer to our industry, to our council on different projects, review things, has been a support, a trainer, has been part of the training efforts that we've done with the department and training personnel with seismology, with blasting related things. And so I'd like to recommend him to be considered for the spot that I vacate. Not that that's necessarily an official thing, but I'd certainly like to share that. But I want to just tell you thank you for the opportunity. I was really honored and blessed to be invited to serve when the board was created, this advisory board, and it's been a joy to work with the industry. The department's, I think, great. I really appreciate the attitude that we've had, the camaraderie we've shared, the opportunity to work together toward a goal, and seen a lot of really good things happen. We don't hear about as many of those great things or good things, the daily things that are happening. They don't always make it to TV. It's the few exceptions that are exceptions to the amount of amazing things that happen in our industry. And so I appreciate the working relationship that I've had with fellow committee members and with the department, and the opportunity I've had to serve. I just want to say thank you.
Starts with the committee founding members. So the law was changed in 2000, I guess, after a deadly incident that we had a blast advisory council involved long before then in writing the 2000 law. And then since then, there's been several revisions, 2007, 2009, now the most recent one. And every time there was a vibration question about which Z-curve to use, whatever, you were always there and working through the Tennessee Road Builders Association as well. So there's a lifetime of commitment to us, certainly a lifetime of commitment to our industry. and a lifetime of commitment beyond the lines of Tennessee. I know you've been involved with IACE, with other vibration committees, training events like Kentucky. All the best. Best. Knowing that you won't retire, we still have you as a resource.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
We have something for you. All the industry. A rocking chair now. 20.
Thank you.
The time, but there was some story. You know, when you mentioned some of the highlights that you've accomplished. When you look back then, I think the statistics were we had over 1,000 blasters in the state, because all you need to do is send in $10 and you got a card. And through training, we got the right people in the right places, and then through good choices that balanced enforcement with training and regulation. Long way, even for some places like Kentucky Blasting Conference, commenting on what Tennessee has and what they need. Like we were the first ones to have notifications for blasting that made it easier for way of looking at science, not necessarily well thought out process that has a vision that started back then. In the spirit of that vision, I understand your right-hand man has been with you for more than 30 years now, so I'm sure he's learned a lot. Eric Kagorian is sitting in the back. And Eric's been working with us, indirectly through Wade on many of those things, getting the research done and being in the background working with us. So from my perspective, I think, thank you for making the suggestion for Eric to serve us. So thank you for agreeing to serve. And I think now it's up to us to demonstrate consensus. So I make the motion to suggest Eric Kagorian to the State Fire Marshal as the successor for Mr. Wade Hutchinson's seat.
Second that.
As a second, all in favor of that motion, please say aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous.
One comment, Eric. You're gonna have to thumb it down. Oh, and you gotta slow down. Only complaints.
That makes a difference between $40 bulb.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I told Alan, and he said, I thought we said it's a $40 damage. It's $300.
He talks too fast. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Hardhead.
Thank you. We look forward to having you on the with. Yes, we public. Is there anything that we left off on old business, new business, anything that we omitted at this point? Then I close the official business portion of the meeting. We have a few items outstanding. A few announcements. The Kentucky Blasting Conference is typically held every December, and it's again in Lexington, Kentucky this year, December 8 and December 9. It's a full day on December 8 and a half day on December 9. And the organizing committee has asked me to give a presentation, and I said I'd be glad to do one, and I'd like to include updates on the Tennessee blasting standard to our friends that also attend the Kentucky Blasting Conference. So they'll get an update on, the few changes to the standard on that Thursday, December 8th. There's also an underground session for those who are interested from the Kentucky Crushed Stone Association. It's on December 6 and 7 in Louisville, Kentucky. That's specifically for underground stone quarries. Another conference that's coming up is the ISCE conference. That's the national conference of the of the International Society of Explosives Engineers, and that's February 3 through February 8, 23 in San Antonio, Texas. They typically have a blasters weekend on Saturday. That is also continuing education for blasters, and then a conference from Sunday through Wednesday. Saturday, yes. Oh, sure. Okay. ISCE.org is the website. You can check the program and everything else. So now it's time to set the date for our next meeting. Typically, we would look at April. And if you look at April 14th, a typical time frame, unless it interferes with Well, typically it's been Thursday or Friday of that week, whatever works for the administration better. Used to be Friday, but some people said that Thursday works better, especially if you're traveling from East Tennessee. So that would mean
Yeah, I'd rather do it Thursday.
that would mean April the 13th. th. Once the 20th. Session for the next meeting, we tentatively said Thursday, April 13th, 2023. Else? Thank you so much for volunteering your time and resources to be here and spend time with us. Progress is steady, and it's going in the right direction, according to Wade. We made a lot of progress, and again, one thing is that bugs me is, we have the law change, and it passed Congress, or it passed the House and the State Senate side unanimously, so there was no opposition to what we're trying to do, and I think that is also a reflection that our approach is sound. And it's the cooperation, the communication and cooperation that really makes things go. So thanks very much. Okay, we have a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, I second. All in favor, say aye. Be safe. See you next time. Happy Thanksgiving, happy Christmas, and we'll see you then in April.